What's up, Cybernetics? Welcome back to a new quick win, and today we're going to talk about drag and drop using Ionic. We don't need any external packages, so like in the past when we use draggable or something like this, we will rely on Ionic gestures, and this is going to be really interesting. So the only thing you need is really a blank new Ionic application. I also brought up my application on a device right here with Capacitor live reload, and we basically only need to change these three files. To get started, let's quickly move into our HTML because that's actually the most easiest part. We want to add two drop areas so we can add like players to different teams. Just to see how you could do this in your own application, you might just need one area, that's fine, but this should work fine for a lot of cases. So we will actually use a fixed element. That's something we can use with Ion content, which will be fixed at the top. So if we now add like another div class drop area in here, and we will already call this drop zone A, so we can access it as a view child later. This will be team blue. And also we're gonna add, well, we will skip this for now. Let's just add another area in here. And as a result, do I have somewhere my Ionic serve? Yeah, maybe we can also take a look at this on the side. Well, doesn't really look too interesting right now. That's also team red. Let's also add below our div slot fixed another div element for class item group. And in here we will have the actual Ion items, which we will be able to drop into our drop zones. So in here we of course need a little iteration. Let I of my array. Maybe we should quickly add this, and then we will call this one player 1, 2, 3, whatever. To initialize my array, let's move to the home page. Actually, I already got the line in here. Simply an array from array 30. That's just a quick example of filling an array with numbers from 0 to 30. So now we get the list of items. We see that our elements are already fixed in the slot fixed at top. But of course, we need a bit more styling in there. And of course, this one is drop zone B. So we really need to find out these two view children in the end so we can check if we're currently moving an element above one of these zones. So I came up with a little CSS, which I'll bring in. Let's quickly go through this. So the fixed box, hello, fixed box, is usually a bit small. And if we give the fixed box a little bit more width, actually 100%, and a background color and a fixed height, it will be right here at the top. Then for each drop area we use a border, as you can see right here, a little dash border, a bit of margin, and to calculate the width correctly we need to use half of the width and reduce it by the margin on the sides. Then we got the align item center, display, inline flex, justify content center. So all the content is here inside the center. We got a little bit of height so we can fill our fixed box. It's actually a bit smaller just because we can. User select none. I actually found that sometimes we had this drag and then the text was highlighted, and user select none just prevents selecting the text, and then also background color. And if we don't add a margin to our item group, the item group is actually hidden behind the slot fixed and will start at the top. So that's of course not really what we want to achieve. We want to achieve that the drag or the drop area is always at the top, and we can still scroll down our list below it. So that is the start of our tutorial. Actually, we can close the CSS already. For the home page, let's also add team blue in here, perhaps just as JSON, so we can show who's already on team blue after dropping and who's already on team red. As far as I know, I also created them as empty arrays, exactly, so it doesn't really change anything if you don't mess up all the brackets in here. And then there's one more issue. If you now start dragging something in here, the list will actually move the ion content. Perhaps we will leave this open for now so I can show you how and why we'll use content scroll active later. We can already edit since it's just set to true. So you can change actually dynamically if the ion content is scrollable. So since the content scroll active is currently true, we are able to scroll this. If we would change it to false, we actually wouldn't be allowed to scroll the content anymore. Exactly, so you see, I can't scroll it. Okay, let's set it back to true. And then we can get started by accessing a few view childs of our view. First of all, we need the view child drop zone A. Let's just call this drop A element reference. I made a mistake somewhere. Okay, Angular can be kind of confusing where to put all this stuff, right? So now we're able to access both drop zones, and we will be able to get the client or the bounding rect of these drop zones so we can check if we moved something over these boxes. We also want to access all of our Ion items, because when you create a gesture with Ionic using the gesture controller, which we can actually inject gesture controller right here, then you always need to have an item for this gesture. So let's say gesture controller create, and then you need an element. And because we want to add the gesture allowing drag and drop to each of our Ion items, we can't just add a template, whatever, in here and access that manually. We can instead simply use the add view children. So it becomes a list of items. We want to access the Ion item. We actually want to read the element reference of these items. And this one is now of the type query list. It's actually just a list that holds an array of the element references. It's not too complicated. It's just a tiny bit different to access them. Since we need access to the native elements, we can only do this inside the after view init. So that's why we have this ng after view init block. I already added this upfront, in which we will update our gestures, or in the beginning just create the gestures in the first place. And therefore we will first of all access from the items, which contains all the Ion items. So let's log this out, my items, this.items. From all the items we actually want to get to array, because otherwise it's a kind of strange list. My items, you see, it's a query list. But if we call to array, we will have a nice array of elements, which looks actually a lot better. So there we go, 30 element references, perfect for our endeavor. Let's go through each of those items. Actually, could I use another loop? Most likely I could, but I had this in the beginning, so I will just stick to this. And then there we go. For each of the items or the element references in that array, we first will want to access the item, which is at the array position I. And then it gets interesting because we're going to create a new gesture using the gesture controller. The drag will have an element first of all, so one item dot native element. I don't know why this is all the time above my implementation today. It's kind of annoying a bit. We need a threshold where it starts. I'll set this to 1. We will come back to this in the end because there's a little bit tiny problem with the implementation that makes it a bit harder. We need a gesture name. I will just name it drag. It doesn't really matter too much. And then we can listen to different events. We can listen to the onStart event. We can listen to the onMove event. And we can also, of course, listen to the onEnd event. Who might have thought? So that's one gesture implemented. We will fill in our basically the whole logic for the drag and drop in these three parts. And it's important to also call drag.enable in the end. Now the problem is we will move players to the different boxes and we will then remove the players from the initial array. We also need to update the query list because it's not automatically updated at the same time, and also we need to update the gestures because otherwise the different arrays that we have are kind of out of sync. And therefore we will also keep track of all the gestures. Do I already have a gesture array? Nope. So let's add this one as well, gesture array. We can already say it's of the type gesture array and implement it as an empty array. So then we can use this to keep track of all our gestures. It's always a good idea if you have a lot of gestures. You might need to disable them later, or in fact, I don't know if we really need to disable them. I had this in combination with Ion reorder, which I actually wanted to show you as well. Initially, I wanted to bring this as well into this tutorial, but then it got kind of out of hand. So there is an Ion reorder component. I don't know if you've used it in the past. You can toggle it. You can also use it without toggle to reorder items inside a list by clicking on the full item or just the icon. You can toggle it or always set it to on. The implementation for Ion reorder is really super easy, and I wanted to do this so we can switch between dragging and reordering. But that was kind of confusing, and I thought for now we're going to focus on the drag and drop because the Ion reorder component is in itself quite easy. But if you want to see something about this, just leave a comment below the video. And of course, all the code for this tutorial is as usually available for the Ionic Academy members. But now we are going to continue because if we have a function that's called update, you should actually perform something a bit like an update. So we will set all, or we will actually remove all the gestures by calling gesture destroy on each of those items in the beginning and then set it back to an empty array. I think for my implementation without the reorder, we don't need it, but for now I will just leave it in here since it doesn't do any bad to us, I would say. All right. After the for loop, we will come to the implementation soon, but we also want to listen to the changes of the items. The items is the query list of our elements. So when we later drop an element, we will remove it, and that will also update the items list, but not immediately. And therefore, I had problems updating the list correctly, and actually the easiest way is to use the changes in here. So I will put in items changed, because at that point we can be sure that the items actually have really changed. So let's get started. Right now we have the gesture enabled, but because we are not doing anything on start, on move, or on end, it's actually not doing anything. Let's get started with on start. In here, we want to change the style of our one element that we're selecting to a little bit different opacity and making it bold. Now, what I wanted to show you comes in or becomes important here. This is the app on my device. I can now use this. Actually, okay, yeah. I can touch it, but we haven't implemented the on move. So let's also implement a basic on move for now, in which we will just transform the style of the element using the delta X and delta Y of the actual event, and also changing the index because otherwise the item is actually behind the other item. So now we're already able to do this. Now we have used the threshold. Where's the threshold? 1. I'll change this to 0 and show you the problem on a real device because it's otherwise kind of hard. I can now scroll through the list, but this kind of happens, and that's not really what I want to do. And also, it's in general kind of hard to scroll the list. You will sometimes touch an item it's really annoying. So I set the threshold to activate the gesture to 1, which means you first of all need to move the item a tiny bit before it actually begins this drag move. So that was the whole idea of using the threshold 1. In the end, if you want to implement this, for example, in a Todoist application, there's usually something like a long touch or a long press that activates the behavior of dragging things around. Because otherwise, just think about it. You can't just scroll a list and have a drag or whatever touch event here at the same time. That's just not going to work. You need some kind of place to really start this dragging event. Now, what I also wanted to show, actually, I'm not sure why it works, because, yeah, I'm not sure, because I really wanted to disable scroll. In the past, when I used this dragging, the list was still moving. So what I did to fix this is I used this content scroll active false, which means the Ion content is locked in and we can't scroll anymore in that direction. To make this work, I also in other places use the private change detector reference from Angular Core. Yeah, that's wrong. And simply called on our, or when we make any changes inside an async function, where is it? Detect changes. This simply updates the view. Usually, if some updates are not picked up immediately, this will usually help. Okay, why is my item behind the box? Shouldn't it be above the box? Well, we got the index in here. Did we use the right index for the drop area? Fixed box actually has an index of 11. Shouldn't this be like 10 or 9? We will see in the end. We will see. So we got the on start. We can start the move. On move, we change direction, and now it's time to detect if we're above a box in here. I will just change this to 11 because I think that's actually the problem. So we can detect this on move, and therefore we will use our check drop zone hover. And we will pass in the current X and Y. And let me quickly check. No, that actually wasn't the fix. Maybe we will see later. So within here, the only thing we need to do is check, is our current item above team blue or team red or whatever drop zone that you have set up. So that's what we're gonna do now. And to do so, we first of all get the bounding client rect for both of our drop zones. In the end, you could also create your custom component drop zone and pass in some or pass around some inputs and functions. But I think for this tutorial, that's actually a bit overkill because it makes things a lot more complicated for now. Now we just have everything inside the homepage so you can see the whole functionality in place. Once you got the both of the drop zones, you just need to check if the coordinates of the drag move are within a specific drop zone. And that's where another function came into place, which checks if the coordinates are within a drop zone. So if the X coordinate is below the left or above the right, it means it's somewhere on this side. And if the Y is below top or above bottom, it's also not in the box. In those cases, we will return false, and otherwise it means we're inside the box. And if we're inside the box, so if is in zone is true, we can style the background color of the drop zone to blue or to red, depending on our team. Actually, quite simple logic. This isn't really hard stuff, right? That's just a few ifs and using a few things. And team blue, team red, and there we go. I'm actually not sure why I don't see my item anymore. I'm really, yeah, that should kind of be like 10. And if my item has 11, it should be above the box in my eyes. Now it's above the box, great. So as you can see, when the move starts and is above the box turns to a specific color. Same now on a device. I can move it here, I can move it there. It worked completely using my finger as a proof, like, no, I lost the connection, no. That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to show you something cool. That was really not what I wanted to do. Anyway, that's the start of our function. Once we now drop our element, we get to the on-end block of our drag gesture. And inside that block, we will first of all set our content scroll back to active, so we can use the regular Ion content scroll once again. And I will also use my screen mirroring, hopefully very soon again. But the more important part here is to actually handle the drop. No, that wasn't handle the drop. That's handle drop. So to handle the drop, we will pass in the real item, which is the Ion item itself. So the element reference, the current position where we drop the item, and the index, so we can do a bit of transformation on the initial arrays. A lot of this really looks complicated, but once you got the code inside your own IDE, just play around with it, get a little feeling for it, because it's actually not too hard if you understand what's going on start, on move, and in the end. Really, it's really not too hard. So we just have this one handle drop function in the end open. Once again, we need access to our two drop zones using the function we had before. And now we can check if something is in zone drop A or in drop B. If it is in zone A, it means we drop the item at that position. So we need to do a few things. We need to do actually three things. We need to remove the item, which is the DOM element itself, because we don't want to have it in our list, and because we also splice our myArray, which holds all the dummy numbers from 0 to 29. That's already number 2 that we do. We splice the array. And number 3 is adding the removed item to the other team array, or doing whatever you want within your drop zone with this item. We can also, to make this more logical, in that order. So we first remove the value from our array, which will also update our ng4. It won't immediately update our query list. That's why we are subscribed to the changes. So once we do this, we should, after another tick, see the changes log. Then we add it to the other team, which is just a data thing that we do. And then we remove the actual item from the DOM. Also, if we're not within those two zones, so else if, it means we have a third case of else. And in that case, we will just bring the item back to the initial position, translate 0, 0, setting the index back to inherit, a tiny animation, opacity, and font weight back to normal. Also, since we're currently maybe above a drop zone, we should also reset their color so it doesn't stay like this forever, blue or red forever. And then we might also need our change detector ref to once again detect changes in the view and update the view. And we should hopefully see a log items change also after dropping one item. So let's give this a try. Player 0, team blue, and items changed. Player 1. And now you see something interesting, because I always use the top element of our list, and team blue has player 0, 2, 5, 7, 10. That's really not what we expected. And the problem is that our arrays are now a bit out of sync. We have this myArray where we removed an item. We have an item, we have an array of gestures, which is still at 30 items. And then we have our items list, which we also haven't really updated. And therefore, we will trigger this functionality inside our function now. So this dot update gestures. And what's happening now is interesting, because that's also not yet the fix. You will see why once again in a second. So we drop that, and we drop that. And now you already see the log is filling kind of up, because we're dropping one item and items change is triggered like 10 times already. The reason is, actually I'm not sure what the reason is. I think because inside our update gestures, we also do something that changes the items. So to prevent this, what we're going to do is we will surround this with a little if. And if this dot gestures array length isn't equal to our query list length, only in that case we want to update the gestures, because that means an item or a view child was removed and the gestures array wasn't updated. But after we run through this, we should have the same amount or the equal amount of gestures inside that array and items available in the view. It's actually more complicated than it really is. It shouldn't be. So that was really the quick fix. So now I can draw player 0, player 1, and you see it's still triggered a lot of times, the subscribe, but that's not really a problem since we have our check in here, which prevents executing update gestures like 10 times. And now we can drop the different players into the different teams. Don't really mind the styling up here. It was just a dummy case. And of course, we can also use the same functionality, actually kind of like this even more on a real device. Playing around, dropping this. So you could now implement a file upload. You can like select images and drop them around somewhere. I really like drag and drop all the time on a device. I think it's one of the coolest functionalities. The Todoist application has a fab button that allows to insert something exactly at a specific place. And actually, you also see if I don't drop it above a box, it moves slowly back into position. You could even implement your own reorder with this, but the Ion reorder is, I think, a bit easier for that case. Just a quick note, once again, you need to move it currently a tiny bit to the side. That actually makes selecting it easier, because otherwise we're preventing the Ion content scroll. So that's why we use the threshold of 1. You can also trigger the threshold of 1 somehow. Well, it works better if you move it a bit to the side. So that would be a future optimization to add like a long press to only then activate drag. But so far we got Ionic drag and drop using only built-in functionalities with the Ionic gesture controller. We've created our own drop zone, actually 2 of them, and you could now go ahead and create a nice little component from this that you can reuse inside your application. And again, check out the code linked below the video, available for all Ionic Academy members. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and stay subscribed so you get notified about all the new tutorials, quick wins, and other app development and web development videos on this channel. If you want to learn more about Ionic with in-depth courses, a community of like-minded developers so you can learn and build your apps faster, you should definitely check out the Ionic Academy, which is my code school to help you with everything Ionic, with a huge library of courses, material, and a supportive Slack channel so we can get your app out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you inside the next video. Have a great day and happy coding. Simon.